Hey, what's up guys? Welcome to my updated Raiden Shogun guide. Since Raiden Shogun just got a rerun banner, I figured it's the perfect time to make an updated guide, especially with the new information regarding her kit and how to play her. In this video, I'm going to be covering everything you need to know about Raiden Shogun, covering her builds, weapons, teams, talents, playstyles, both DPS and support, and everything else regarding this character. I'm going to be even answering frequently asked questions like how much energy recharge you need, cover her optimal playstyles and rotations, and also include a full weapon ranking so you guys know exactly how to build her. As always, I want to keep my intro nice and short so that we can get right into it. Before we do though, I want you guys to know that I do stream quite often on Twitch, so link in the description if you're interested. And with that being said, let's go. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do is talk about Raiden's abilities and her playstyle, talk about how to get the most value out of her kit. Raiden Shogun's kit mainly revolves around her elemental burst, but before we get into that, let's quickly talk about her elemental skill. This is a very simple ability. You press it once and you get this Eye of Stormy Judgment buff, which will attack alongside your characters, doing a little bit of AoE electro damage. The damage that this does isn't insane. As you can see, the scaling is not that high, especially on the second part, which is the passive attack damage, but the main reason you're using this is because of the elemental burst damage that it provides. In fact, when you use this ability and you have the buff active, all your party members will gain elemental burst damage bonus just passively when they use their burst. This buffs them based on the energy cost of their burst and also based on your Raiden Shogun's talent level. I will put on screen right now some examples of how much damage this skill can give you to give you an idea of its strength. On top of that, your elemental skills buff lasts for 25 seconds and only has a 10-second cooldown, so the uptime is very easy to maintain. Now moving on to your elemental burst, which has a very long effect, this is the central part of Raiden Shogun's kit. The reason why Raiden Shogun is so prominent as a character and why I like her so much is because inside of her elemental burst, she will infuse her auto attacks with electro, making them deal electro damage while also restoring energy for your entire team. The way this works is it starts by doing one initial hit of damage with, as you can see, a very high scaling, and then after that, all of her auto attacks, charge attacks, and plunge attacks will be infused with electro, converting them to not only electro damage but also burst damage. What this means is any source of bonuses, of buffs to that type of damage, so any buffs to your electro damage or any buffs to your burst damage, thinking of something like the emblem set, which we'll talk about later, will increase the damage of all of your auto attacks. On top of that, something you need to know is that the damage of her burst will be increased based on how many bursts you used before Raiden's and what their energy cost was. The way this works is that when other party members use their burst, Raiden Shogun gains resolve stacks based on, as I said, the energy cost of those bursts. You can therefore stack this up quite significantly by using your burst on your other characters first and then swapping into your Raiden Shogun using her burst, which will deal a massive amount of damage and also regenerate energy for your whole team, as I mentioned previously. Other things you need to know about this ability are that number one, it has a 90 energy cost, which is very high. It's the highest in the game, but since Raiden Shogun is a character who does want a lot of energy recharge anyways, this is typically something that is very manageable. Your burst lasts for 7 seconds and has a 18-second cooldown, which means you're obviously going to be on field with her for that whole duration, those 7 seconds, and then swapping out using your other characters and then coming back into her when the cooldown is up. Other important things to know are that, first of all, she scales on energy recharge, meaning that not only do you want energy recharge to get your burst on cooldown, but on top of that, that energy recharge that you're building will also give you some electro damage bonus and better energy restoration inside of your burst to your other party members. Because of that, people run a lot of energy recharge on Raiden Shogun, although I will cover the exact amount in the artifact section in a bit, so stay tuned for that. Do keep in mind, however, with this passive, before we move on, that these bonuses are very nice to have, but does not mean you only want to build energy recharge, as obviously going crit or attack percent can still yield you higher personal damage, but again, we'll cover that in the next section. Your other passive talent also just gives you more resolve stacks, which will give you more damage inside of your burst when any party member collects elemental orbs or particles, so it's just a nice passive effect that you don't have to worry about. Other things I wanted to add regarding these abilities are that, first of all, neither your burst nor your elemental skill snapshots, which means that all of your damage does scale with whatever buffs you give your Raiden. Regarding your talent priority, if it wasn't obvious, your elemental burst is really what you want to prioritize, as this is the main source of Raiden Shogun's damage, but also level your elemental skill after to buff its effect. Do keep in mind that your normal attacks are something you can ignore, as inside of your burst you get a separate scaling, as you can see, so your normal attacks are not something that you need to level. Now moving on to Raiden Shogun's playstyles, there are mainly 2 of them. While I covered this in great detail in my last video, the main thing you need to know is that she can can either be played as a main DPS or a hyper carry, or alternatively used as a support, sub DPS, whatever you want to call it, where she's mainly swapped into for her burst damage in a team that can fit her in. Since Raiden Shogun is a character that needs a lot of time on field, she can't be fit in every single team, but she still has quite a lot where she's good in. With that said, I will cover these teams in much more detail in the team comp section of this video. Something you need to know if you don't already, that is a big disappointment to me, especially at the time that Raiden came out, is that she does not work with Beto's burst. In fact, the attacks inside of Raiden Shogun's burst are considered burst damage and not normal attacks, and so when you use Beto's burst and Raiden's burst together, there will be no discharges from Beto, meaning that Raiden Shogun's burst does not work with Beto's burst, which was a big letdown. That being said, there are still some teams where they can work together, but just keep in mind that their bursts do not have any synergy with one another. On the contrary, Xingqiu and Raiden's bursts do work together, because Xingqiu's bursts are shot out even if you miss the normal attack. It's basically on like the swing, as you guys can see, so even inside of Raiden Shogun's burst, Xingqiu does synergize. This is an important distinction between the two characters that you need to know in order to build efficient teams and understand the synergies that Raiden has. Alright, now moving on, let's get into Raiden Shogun's builds. This is a very important section and one where things can get more complicated. First of all though, for the artifact sets, it's actually pretty straightforward. The Emblem of Severed Fate is a set pretty much made for Raiden and characters of the sort, as it just really will increase your burst damage. The 2-piece gives you 20% energy recharge, which is very nice on Raiden, and then the 4-piece will increase your burst damage by 25% of your energy recharge. You can get a maximum of 75%, and with Raiden, a character who wants to stack a lot of energy recharge, this effect really adds up. While there are other viable artifact sets, I really don't like them as much as Emblem. Sets like Thunder Soother and Tuna Bless with another 2-piece are definitely viable, but the Emblem of Severed Fate is just so good overall and so much better that it is really what I advise. On top of that, it is a very efficient domain to farm that is very good for your account overall, as both the Emblem and the Reminiscence set, which come together in the same domain, are very important to have on your account, so I highly advise farming this for your Raiden Shogun. Now with that said, let's talk about what stats you want on your artifacts. This is where things can get much more complicated, so I want to explain it in as much detail as possible and try to simplify this so that you can build your Raiden as efficiently as possible. The first and most important thing I want to say though is that generally speaking, substats are what matter the most for Raiden. When you're asking yourself what sands you should go between energy recharge and attack percent, or which goblet you should go, as there's also many viable ones, which substats you have are generally the most important factor, along with some other things to consider like what team and what weapon you are running. To go into a bit more detail, the first stat you want on Raiden is enough energy recharge to meet your needs so that you can spam your Raiden's burst on cooldown and also give enough energy to your other characters. In general, a good range of energy recharge to go for, if you're wondering, is around 200 to 250 energy recharge. This range is quite high and varies highly on your team, but I typically recommend going on the higher end to not only be more comfortable, but also because your elemental skill randomly generates particles, it has a chance to generate it on every hit, so your energy generation can vary from rotation to rotation. With that said, other stats you want are attack percent, crit rate, and crit damage to just increase your overall damage. Because of that, those 3 stats plus energy recharge are what you're going to be looking for on your substats on every single piece. For your main stats, while you obviously want either crit rate or crit damage on your circlet, whichever one you need more of, for your sands and goblet, it highly depends. First of all, let's talk about your sands. For this slot, there are obviously only 2 options. You can either go for an energy recharge sands or an attack percent one, and which one is better depends on many things. What it depends on is not only your substats, as I mentioned, but also the team you're running and how much energy they generate, and also what weapon you're using. To make this very simple, here's how I'm going to explain it. An energy recharge sands is typically the more general option if your Raiden doesn't have enough energy to meet her needs. If you're running under 200 or 250, depending on what you're going for, energy recharge sands can help you get enough energy recharge while also going for more offensive stats on your substats. On top of that, any energy recharge you gain will give you damage from the emblem set and your passive talent, so it's not like a wasted stat, although do keep in mind that for Raiden herself, an attack percent sands will give you more damage than an energy recharge one, generally speaking. There are some exceptions to this, like running engulfing lightning, but in general, an attack percent sands will give you more damage, whereas an energy recharge sands will help you meet the ER requirement that you need, while also giving you some damage so you don't lose out on much. I do want to also say that if you're running a weapon that has attack percent or crit on the stat, you'll typically want an energy recharge sands to make up for it, whereas if you're over overcapping on energy recharge, attack percent sands can also be good. But do keep in mind that the more attack percent you gain from external sources like Bennett or Sara, who are characters that synergize very well with Raiden, the less you need attack percent on your artifacts, and the more energy recharge and crit and stuff will be valuable. And so to summarize, while it does depend, the energy recharge sands is the more generalistic, comfy option, whereas an attack percent sands will give you more damage to your Raiden. Moving on to your Goblet, there's really two options once again, an attack percent Goblet or an Electro one. Both of these are very good and viable options for Raiden Shogun. The difference in the two is honestly very slim, to where typically substats once again are the main thing you're looking for, so you can pick whichever one you have that's better. To go into more detail on which one is optimal, one thing I want to point out is that if you're running characters that give you a lot of attack percent, or if you're running an attack percent sands, you start having so much that you hit diminishing returns, meaning that the more attack percent you gain, the less it's impactful, to where electro damage bonus can start being better. On screen right now, I'll include some tips as to which Goblet you should go that I have found from the Raiden mains Discord, so shout out to them for this. As you can see, depending on the team you're running, the weapon you're running, or what sands you have, the best Goblet for you can change, with electro damage bonus being favored when you have a lot of sources of attack percent, and an attack percent Goblet being a good standalone pick, with the deciding factor oftentimes just being your substats. I also wanted to add that if you're running an Engulfing Lightning, generally speaking, energy recharge sands and electro Goblet are going to be your favorable options because of the way they synergize with your weapon. Artifact wise, I really hope I did a good job at explaining what's the best for you. If there's any questions though, feel free to ask them in the comments, as I will try to read all of them. Now with that being said, it's time to move on to Raiden Shogun's weapons. Luckily, Raiden's a character with many really good weapons and an amazing free-to-play option, which makes Raiden Shogun a pretty accessible character weapon-wise, in the sense that everyone can get a good weapon for her. The first thing you should know is that Raiden Shogun's best in slot is the Engulfing Lightning. This weapon is insane because it gives you energy recharge and attack percent through its effect, and just the sheer amount of stats and DPS that this weapon gives you is honestly really good. Because of that, it's undisputably her best in slot weapon. However, I do want to avoid overhyping it, because while it is really good and you can use it if you have it or pull for it if you want it, Raiden Shogun has an amazing free-to-play option with the catch that everyone has access to. The catch is a weapon that anyone can get for free by fishing and buying it from a shop, and once you refine this to refinement rank 5, it gives you an insane amount of stats, being 32% burst damage, 12% burst crit rate, and over 45% energy recharge. This weapon is basically a free-to-play 5-star weapon because of how good it is for Raiden. While there are some weapons that are better than it, the fact that there's such an amazing free-to-play option available makes it to where there's a really good option for every player. That being said, some weapons can be better than the catch if you do have them. Those weapons include other 5-stars like Staff of Homa or Jade Wing Spear, and also a high refinement Wavebreaker Fin if you have it. The exact strength of this weapon varies based on the energy cost of your team's bursts, and also the refinement of the Wavebreaker, with it having surprisingly good DPS at R5. Other good weapons include the Deathmatch, which gives you a lot of crit rate and can be good if you don't have the catch, or if your build needs a lot more crit rate, and the Skyward Spine can be a good 5-star option, although its DPS overall is very similar to the catch, as you guys will see in the weapon ranking. The same can also be said about the Vortex Vanquisher, which is a weapon that just gives you a lot of attack percent, but is not my favorite for Raiden, although it's definitely viable. For the Favonius Lance, since I saw a lot of people asking me about this weapon, it is okay, it gives you energy recharge and a high base attack, but it's not nearly as good as the other options I mentioned, like once again, the free-to-play polearm. With that said, here are the weapon rankings for Raiden Shogun with the assumptions written above. Another thing to keep in mind is that the exact weapon ranking highly varies from player to player, so this should mainly just be used to get a general idea, as Raiden Shogun is a very unique character and her optimal build can vary from weapon to weapon, which will therefore make you change your artifacts, and so what the best weapon is for you can depend on what your best artifacts are. Moving on, I want to give some more advanced info regarding how to get the most damage out of Raiden Shogun, specifically talking about her combos. The main one you need to know is that doing 3 normal attacks into a charge attack is a good way to deal efficient damage. Throughout your burst, you can fit in 3 of those combos, so you can do 3 normal attacks into a charge attack 3 times in a row, and then you can finish your rotation by doing 1 last normal attack into a charge attack, which should last your entire burst duration and be a nice general combo that you can do. Now moving on to Raiden Shogun's Constellations, I want to answer a lot of the questions that I get regarding Raiden Shogun, how good her Constellations are, and especially her second one. Now I do want to start by saying that Raiden Shogun is an amazing character even at C0. Everything I said in this video and all the praise I gave her and the powerful role that she fills is all true at C0. My personal Raiden doesn't have any Constellations, and she performs very well both as a support and also as a hyper carry. That being said, her second Constellation is one of the strongest ones in the game, making her on par with even some C6s of other characters. What this Constellation does, in case you don't know, is make Raiden Shogun inside of her burst ignore 60% of opponents' defense, which is absolutely insane. This skyrockets her DPS and makes her much better overall regardless of how you play her, and even further emphasizes a hyper carry playstyle where your damage will be very high. The overall increase increase to your Raiden's damage through this constellation is around 40%, which is absolutely huge, on top of gaining a bit of extra damage as well from your first constellation that we'll talk about later. Overall, the second constellation is insanely high value for a C2, but that does not mean you should feel forced to spend your primo gems on it, because if you're a low spender or a free-to-play player, while C2 is valuable and a good constellation to have, it is by no means needed, and you should be happy even with a C0 Raiden. With that said, C2 is very good and will give you about a 40% damage increase. For your other constellations, your first one gives you more resolve stacks, giving you 20% more when your teammates use their bursts, and 80% if those other characters are electro. This constellation isn't the biggest one, but will just give you a bit more damage. Your C3 and 5 both increase your talent levels, with C3 increasing your burst talent level, which is honestly quite relevant since, as we saw, Raiden's damage comes mainly from her burst. Because of that, C3 is honestly pretty nice and a good upgrade, although not as good as C2. Raiden's fourth constellation will give 30% attack bonus to your party members when her burst expires. This buff lasts for 10 seconds and is okay, but not amazing. Since this buff comes after your burst, it doesn't really affect your first rotation, but it is an okay constellation. Lastly, your sixth constellation is a very weird one, as every attack inside of Raiden's burst will decrease other party members' bursts cooldown by 1 second. While I feel like this could be good in certain teams or even with future characters, while I personally can't test this, I'm sure there's some unique rotations you can do with this constellation, but it does not seem to be the most powerful C6. Overall, I want to reiterate that Raiden's very good at C0, with C2 also being a really big power spike if you do want to pull for constellations. C2 is definitely my favorite one, and C3 is also quite good. Now moving on to one of the most important sections of the video, which is regarding Raiden Shogun's best teams. I'm going to split this section in two, giving you teams for Raiden as a hyper carry and other teams where Raiden is used in a more supportive or burst DPS role. For a Raiden hyper carry team, there's a few variations. My personal favorite is a team revolving around Raiden Shogun with an electro support, and then Bennett and Kazuha. While many units in this team and in Raiden carry teams in general are quite flexible, this exact team is very good, especially if you have a C6 Sara. The reason for this is because every character here synergizes very well with Raiden. Sara will buff your damage significantly with her 6th constellation and her attack buff. Bennett gives you a lot of attack and healing, and Kazuha is obviously Kazuha. He provides you with Verdescent Venerer and also increased elemental damage bonus when he swirls electro through his passive talents. Because of that, as long as you make sure that you swirl electro, you're going to get a ton of value from a character like Kazuha, and it will allow your Raiden to shine exceptionally well. Now, as I mentioned, many of the characters here are replaceable. If you don't have a C6 Sara or don't want to use her, someone like Yae Miko, someone like Fischl, any character who can fit this electro slot can work quite well. Another variation I wanted to mention for an electro slot is someone like Lisa, but I will explain a bit more about her power level when I talk about Raiden Eula teams. And for Kazuha, while he is the best in this specific team, you can use another Anemo character like Sucrose, who will also get a lot of value. Another pretty good iteration of this Raiden hypercarry team is a mono electro one, where you're pretty much just replacing Bennett with another electro unit, and then you can run an Anemo healer. This team comp is even more flexible, and it does work quite well. The exact formula for like a Raiden Shogun team is typically just, at least for a hypercarry, is typically pairing her with an electro battery, an Anemo unit, and then a flex slot, which in the first team was, running Bennett, and in the second team, a mono electro team is obviously a third electro support, which can be someone like Yae or Fischl. If you want to stray away from the mono electro variation though, there are actually some pretty good Hydra supports that can support your Raiden, characters like Xingqiu, who gives you powerful rain swords, or even someone like Kokomi and Mona, who can both buff your damage, give you thrilling tales, a supportive artifact set if you choose to run it, and also a pretty big DPS increase. Running a Hydra character in the 4th slot basically will just allow your team to run electro charged and give you some nice damage as well. Another variation of a Raiden hypercarry team that I wanted to mention before I move on is a Sunfire Jean team. This team consists of Raiden Shogun with Xingqiu, Jean, and Bennett, where you use Bennett's burst and then infuse your Jean with Pyro and use her burst. Jean in this team can be built on full elemental mastery, as she will be constantly swirling Pyro from off field, dealing a nice amount of passive damage. On top of that, you can use Xingqiu's rain swords and Raiden as your on-field auto attacker to deal massive amounts of damage and proccing a ton of different reactions through your Jean swirling Pyro, your Xingqiu applying Hydro, and your Raiden applying Electro. This is a really unique and fun team that I honestly have not seen a lot of, but that does work quite well. Now, when Raiden plays a more supportive role, and this is the role that I tend to use with Raiden quite a lot, she can fit so many different comps. The most prominent one is the Raiden National team, where you pair her with Xiangling, Xingqiu, and Bennett. I talked about this earlier in the video, so I don't want to repeat myself, but basically this team just works for so many different reasons. Raiden being your on-field auto attacker allows your Xiangling to, as I mentioned, spam reactions like Overload and Vaporize, while also dealing massive amounts of damage herself as well. And something else that's nice about this team in particular is that since Raiden decreases how much energy recharge your characters need, it allows your Xingqiu to run on weapons other than a sacrificial sword, something like a Jade Cutter if you have it, or really any other offensive weapon that you have, as your Xingqiu will really only need around 140 to 160 energy recharge because of how much energy your Raiden gives you. This is therefore one of the best teams in the game, and one that I highly recommend using if you have the units. Another good team for Raiden Shogun is a Eula team, where Raiden Shogun can fill Eula's downtime, as Eula has a lot of burst damage, but her burst has a pretty long cooldown, even like when you're done using it, which will basically be the time where you can swap into Raiden and start auto attacking on her, while also giving energy back to your entire team, allowing your Eula to get her burst back. For those reasons, Eula and Raiden can work very well together, as they do have a lot of synergy with one another. The other characters in this team are pretty flexible. I am running Lisa in this example because Lisa is a very low investment option that is honestly very underrated in this team. She is enabled by Raiden Shogun, who will give her enough energy to spam her burst on cooldown, even if she's on very low investment and pretty bad artifacts. What Lisa offers you is the Thrilling Tales of Dragon Slayers, the Noblesse Oblige set, and especially defense reduction from your passive that will buff your Eula and your Raiden. That being said, there's many other options you can use here, thinking of someone like Fischl or Beto, who can also fit this team. On top of that, if it wasn't obvious, Raiden Shogun is Electro, which allows your team comp to superconduct, increasing your Eula's physical damage, which means you don't even need another Electro support. You can even run something like Rosaria and Bennett together, which can make for a pretty decent team. Lastly, I do want to say that Raiden Shogun can synergize with other units that need a lot of energy. For example, even someone like Shao, who we didn't think worked well with Raiden. There's been a new team that has popped up where you're running double Geo with Shao Raiden, and it actually works like surprisingly well, despite it not being what I typically recommended. Raiden Shogun is therefore very flexible, as long as you pair her with characters that need energy and can fit time in your rotation for Raiden Shogun's burst. Alright, now with that being said, we're gonna get into a DPS showcase of me using Raiden in a team where she shines exceptionally well. This showcase is mainly gonna feature my favorite team, which is the Raiden National team, using Raiden as an on-field auto attacker and enabler for this team. I'll also include some clips of a Raiden hypercarry team where she's used with supports like this, so that I can give you guys a full Raiden showcase. And for my Raiden build, in case you're wondering, I am obviously Constellation 0 with 6-9 talents. Now my skill could be higher, but anyways, it's fine. 4 Emblem of Severed Fate with the catch, because it's a really good free-to-play option, and my ratio is as follows: high energy recharge and a pretty good crit ratio when you factor in that the catch also gives me an extra 12%. This isn't my best Raiden build, as I usually run her with Staff of Homa, but anyways, this is the one I'm running, so I hope you enjoy the showcase. Let's go. Overall, I really like Raiden Shogun. She's a character who I've been using since she first came out, and I've had tons of fun playing with her, and honestly, I believe her damage is quite impressive. I really hope this guide was helpful, and I apologize for the delay. It took me way longer than expected to finish editing and recording this, and I was also busy with some IRL things. I plan on uploading more consistently, and I hope I can follow through on it. So if you want to catch more videos like this, and if it helped you out, feel free to like and subscribe for more content. With that being said, I hope this video was helpful, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.